the more technology is accessible and the more people can create images, the more urgent it is to understand what cinematography actually is.
You also compare AI to the Canon 5D era. And that's, like you said, limited dynamic range, more rate.
We create images with AI at the moment. We cannot bring that level of control to using AI. So what happens is that people look at images created by AI, which are great. They look amazing. But what we can't see is how much people gave up on their original intention when creating that image. The way in which you create this image, that between the intention and that technique is where cinematography is.
This is FocusCheck, the weekly CineTech podcast.
Welcome to this special episode of CineD FocusCheck Podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome again on the podcast Tal Lazar. How are you doing?
Good, Nino. Thank you so much for having me again.
Thanks for being on again. For those of you guys who haven't heard of Tal before, Tal is a filmmaker and educator who has been teaching for a very long time on a lot of reputable institutions around the world, including Sundance, FilmLab, and so on, also the AFI. And he also has a bunch of courses on MZ, thankfully. And today we are reconnecting with Tal to talk about his new book, which is called Cinematography Beyond Technique. And actually, I think we've already talked kind of like that you're working on that the last time you were on the podcast, which must have been like a year ago or so.
Right.
And now it's finally out. So when you are seeing this podcast, the book is out. And yeah, that's why we're kind of reconnecting and finding out what the book is all about.
Yeah, so at least I'm consistent.
You're very consistent. So give us a little bit of a backstory. So we have this course, Language of Cinematography on MZ, which is actually kind of the basis of this book, right?
Absolutely. So really the book started with the course that I was teaching at the American Film Institute. I started teaching Cinematographers, the technical course in the first year at AFI, and that evolved over the years and grew. It became a course for directors, producers, and screenwriters about the language of cinematography, away from technology and more about collaboration and understanding what cinematography actually is. And the book really is a culmination of all of that. It's about 15 years of teaching with all the feedback from students and the things that worked, hopefully not the things that didn't work, into one resource that can be read by the aspiring or professional filmmaker, directors, producers, and screenwriters, and also cinematographers who want to kind of maybe work on their collaboration skills, but also by educators who can use it in the classroom.
You mentioned in the article that, we just published also about the book, that 15 years ago you opened your cinematography courses with a warning about mastering technique like a concert pianist as a cinematographer. Now you open with a painting called The Reading, and it's very different. So what has changed in those 15 years? What are cinematographers not the concert pianists anymore that need to master the technique?
Well, first of all, I never liked technology in the abstract. When you learn math and the problem that they give you is something like two cars are driving towards each other. These are the ways that I understood technology and science better than just numbers and things that are in the abstract. So even when I was teaching the technical course, I tried to always connect it with practical things. But I did believe that, let's say, a cinematographer or a filmmaker that doesn't fully control their craft can't really be a filmmaker. That was where I came from, and the mastery of technology was super important. Our course went deep into film technology, at the time at least, and digital technology, learning about sensors, learning about workflows and everything in the top way possible. But the thing is that I think everybody will agree that you can understand all of that and still make a bad movie. So the question is, what is the actual thing that makes a movie really good, that makes cinematography work? And over the years, it's a little bit more like research, right? This teaching thing. I work with students and we have a back and forth, and my understanding improved. I learned along the way too. And that's how I got to The Reading. this painting that in a very, very short time clarifies what it is exactly that we're doing. You see two characters side by side in a wide shot, right, on a couch. And this question that is very simple, before we even ask, what's the story? When you have more than one character, you can ask, well, who's the main character? If you had to pick one. And then there's magic. 99% of the people in the room pick the same character. So that's already an interesting question. How can we create images that everybody understands the same way?
Who are people picking from this painting?
The woman who is wearing white, right? So this is related to framing. It's related to performance. One character is looking down. The other one is looking up. We have more access to the face. It's related to contrast. There's many, many choices there that we could talk about from a technical perspective. But isolating that, okay, let's talk about wide shots today. Let's talk about contrast. In the abstract, these choices are meaningless. But once you connect them with that very, very simple goal, just tell me who the main character is, that's when I write in the text that even Sundance filmmakers hesitate, because when I bring it back to the students and I say, you know what, if I send you out right now to take a wide shot with two people in it, and making sure that 99% of the audience understand who the main character is, do you think it's going to be easy? And that's when people pause for a moment, because it's not that easy and it's not a technological problem.
Interesting. So, in your opinion, who is the main person in this painting?
The main person in the painting is the woman wearing white. She is the sister of the artist, sitting next to her mother, who's reading the story, and she probably doesn't want to be there. And this is something that you get when you watch this painting. And again, the fact that everybody, using different words, understand the same thing is fascinating to me.
Okay, so I hope the people listening to the audio version of this podcast will actually check out the image in the article or the video version of the podcast, so you know what we're talking about. But let's move on to those traits that actually make out a successful cinematographer in your opinion. You identified those are three traits: technical skill, clarity of intention, and communication. But you also say that many directors don't actually understand what a cinematography does when it comes to story versus camera work. And what does that misunderstanding look like on a set?
Right. So first of all, technical skill, clarity of intention, and communication, those are the three traits that a good cinematographer needs to have. You can't really do this job without technical skill at all. I remember as an assistant, I worked with cinematographers who didn't know where to plug in the BNC. That didn't make them less of a cinematographer, in my opinion. But in order to communicate with rental houses, with camera assistants, with lighting technicians, you need to have a certain baseline. Intention, I always tell my students, imagine yourself standing on a podium in front of 1,000 people. Would you do it without thinking of what it is that you want to say? Of course not. So the podium is the set, and the camera is our tool of expression. And we need to think for a moment what it is that we want to say with it. You won't believe how many people find themselves on set without having considered this question thoroughly. And finally, communication. This is a collaborative medium. Everybody's talking with each other. If you're unable to collaborate, it's going to be difficult. I know that many of the listeners are still kind of in a one-person band kind of a situation. But as soon as you grow and you start working with a crew, communication is crucial. So these are the three aspects that every cinematographer needs to master. And depending on the style of work, depending on the movie, depending on the job, the priority, of course, switches. But these are the three main traits. Now, to your question about understanding cinematography, I think this is something that, it's a problem that existed for many, many years. Every year I get asked by students, who does the shot list? It's repeating again and again and again. Is it the director? Is it the cinematographer? And I think that it's a question that many people have. And magically, after you work in the industry for a while, the question goes away. It's not exactly that the question is actually answered, by the way. It just goes away. And the reason it goes away is because people stop worrying so much about what's mine and what's yours. It's more about working together. But in the beginning, we are all very nervous and we all want to make sure that we do our job really well. So is it my job or is it their job to do the shot list? But at the core of it is a misunderstanding of what cinematography is all about. Because many directors expect, when they hire a cinematographer, to have somebody come in and operate the camera or come up with the technical solutions or be in charge of the workflow, and they will dictate to them what needs to be done in terms of shots, what needs to be done in terms of story, and so on. And lo and behold, here comes a whole generation of cinematographers. I come from AFI, where this is part of the curriculum. So let's say a cinematographer coming from NYU, from Columbia, from AFI, who suddenly wants to talk about the story. And there are many directors who find this a little off-putting. Like, wait a second, what's this person getting into my zone here, into my territory? And that's something that's very, very important to understand, that any of these fields, by the way, this is not even specific to cinematography, that they need to understand what we're trying to say. Remember the clarity of intention. We need to understand what we want to say, because a cinematographer inevitably is going to make decisions independently on set. The director, one, doesn't have the technical knowledge in terms of cameras and lighting and collaboration with all the people on set in order to make all the small decisions. Some of them are not so small, that a cinematographer needs to make, and the cinematographer needs to make them based on an intention that is the director's intention. So they need to understand what that is. And the funny thing is that in clarifying that intention, and I'm sure that many of the listeners have had the same experience, in clarifying the intention tends to change. So you talk with the director and you ask about story, and you ask about character, and you ask about important moments and moments of transformation and realization, and suddenly the scene improves. And good directors work with people who make the movie better. So this is a more holistic view of this thing. I think it's a more professionally consistent view. All the professionals I work with worry less about what's mine and what's yours, and worry more about making the movie better.
Very interesting insights, Tal. I also think a lot of people starting out in their career are not aware of the fact, like you said, that a lot of people are different. Like every director is different. There are directors who really put their full trust in the cinematographer to even frame up every shot. They don't even look at what's, like what the camera captures. They really just care about the performances and maybe about the blocking. But I would also say, you say that now there's a full generation of DPs who actually care about story. Conversely, I think there is also a full generation of directors who care about the image, because we have a lot of, especially younger directors, many coming from the commercial scene or so. They go into feature films, and then have a much more clearer view of what they want to see on screen than a lot of other directors do. Very specific, even down to the lighting. And I think the conversation with those people is, of course, very different from directors who don't really care, or of course they care, but they put their full trust in the cinematographer to frame up. I think in the old days, you would probably have more the directors were the story people and the cinematographers were the visual people. But I think alongside the technology being much more accessible, you have a lot of directors that actually use cameras in their spare time, maybe not professionally like a cinematographer, but they actually are creating images, whether it's in private or even, like just to try out photo storyboards for their productions, even though the cinematographer might not even already be on board with a project. So they are per se more visual than a lot of directors used to be in the past. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And if anything, technology is changing. It's becoming more accessible. And this is a big topic. You know what I'm hinting about here. The more technology is accessible and the more people can create images, the more urgent it is to understand what cinematography actually is. And if I go back to the painting we talked about in the beginning, the question, whose story is it and what the story is about? And then the follow-up question, can you do this? Can you go outside and take a wide shot where 99% of the audience understands who the main character is? The ways to do that, not the camera, not the technology to create the image, but the way in which you create this image, that between the intention and that technique, is where cinematography is. And the image can be created with a camera, it can be created with a pencil, it can be created with AI. But at the end of the day, it's that translation between intention to execution, in between these two things, where cinematography lies. And that's what the book is all about being in that moment of translation, and it's technology agnostic. So if anything, in my opinion, it becomes even more urgent to understand this as technology becomes more accessible. And as you say, as more people are creating images, it's important that they understand how to speak cinematography.
Yeah, and you also mention in the book and in your article that there is a huge gap on display on a set, right? Based on the fact that DPs learn about stand-ins, lighting with stand-ins, and directors really learn blocking without very often understanding lenses and lighting. And when they meet on set, that gap is on full display. How does this show up practically, especially in blocking rehearsals, for example?
Oh, well, I think that if there is a controversial topic, maybe even before or after, I don't know, the who does the shot list is how to do a blocking rehearsal. And this is very common in student films. It's very common in independent films that, I worked on in the beginning of my career. And when I see young filmmakers now, it's in full display when there's a blocking rehearsal that inherently, what is a blocking rehearsal? Is positioning between the camera and the actors on a set. So supposedly, when you do a blocking rehearsal, you need to take into account some visual aspect, right? So like lenses or lighting or all sorts of things that are directly impacting the position or are impacted by it. So directors, especially again, young directors, because as you gain experience, you become a little bit less afraid and less possessive about what's mine and what's yours. But in the beginning of the career, it's blocking rehearsal. I don't want you out of the room. I'm going to close the door. And then many cinematographers have that experience where you come into the room and now you are having to navigate this difficulty of changing things or explaining why, somebody leaning against the wall is a little bit difficult to light or all sorts of very, very common situations. And this is directly coming from the way that we're taught. So like you mentioned, cinematographers are learning lighting with stand-ins on set. So people who just stand there and conveniently you can light around them and it's all easy, but you can learn lighting like that. Or directors who block, but without considering lenses, focal length choice, depth of field, and other more technical aspects, or camera placement and lighting. And then when they meet on set, very confident because they've been to the classes and they graduated and everything, suddenly there's this gap because they overlap. And that's the reality of it, that cinematography and directing overlap. There is no gap per se. There is an overlapping field there. And the only way to deal with that is by really learning about it. That's what the book is for. To really learn about the other person's job and to work together. There is a great scene. There's a documentary on Netflix right now about Charlie Sheen. And there's a moment in the documentary, sorry. There's a moment in the documentary where, and it's about half an hour in the first episode, if I'm not mistaken, he talks about his family, and mid-word, he puts his coffee cup down, and then he apologizes, and he lifts the coffee cup, and he starts his sentence again. Now, if you're a filmmaker, you know exactly what this is about. If you're not a filmmaker, you don't even notice. Actors know that it's impossible to edit a scene in a continuous way between different shots if there is a sound, like putting a coffee cup on the table, on a word, in the middle of a word. So they try to make these small sounds between words. Now, this is a very experienced actor. He knows this. It's second nature to him. Again, concert pianist, second nature territory, right? So he immediately reverses and does it again, even though it's probably single camera interviewed a documentary. It doesn't really matter. But what he proves is that he has knowledge in what? Sound mixing, editing, directing, some minimum threshold in other field. It's not acting, but it makes everybody's job easier. So there is always gaps and overlaps between everybody's positions on set. And if we are aware of it, and if we learn more about each other's job, we can save time, make everybody's life easier, make it more fun, all of the good stuff.
I agree. Great documentary, by the way. I've seen it. And also I can recommend the one about Marty Scorsese on Apple TV right now, which is also giving a lot of great insights about his career and the productions he worked on. But let's go back to speaking cinematography. So you're saying that directors and cinematographers need to actually learn to talk to each other and learn to speak each other's language. Can you give us an example of what that conversation actually sounds like when it works versus when it doesn't work?
Sure. So let's start with the fun stuff when it doesn't work. When you start a conversation with a director that immediately starts talking about shots. I think it should be a wide shot and then it should be a close-up before I even know what the scene is about. Now, again, I don't want to generalize too much. There's people who are very talented, who know exactly what they want and have the knowledge, and they are seeking cinematographers who are more on the execution side. And it's fine. There's no one way to make movies. If I knew how to make the perfect movie, then I would make 10 of them. No problem. But most of the time, when as a cinematographer, you work with the director who immediately starts with the shots, you need to find a way to backtrack, right? So some people say, whoa, let's go back. I personally treat it as an indication. The director imagines a wide shot here. Maybe that tells me something. It doesn't mean that ultimately we're actually going to shoot that wide shot, but it's a mode of communication. This is a visual director. They imagine that, so I need to work with that and see what that means. But that's one example. Directors who treat cinematographers as technical executioners, so to speak, off the image, usually leads, especially in the beginning of the career, to conflict on set. 180-degree line problems or all sorts of things. So when it works, the way that it can work better is one, go have a beer together, go have coffee together, whatever. Forget about the movie. Just talk about why you're making movies to begin with. What moves you to be here right now? Because this collaboration, we do what we do from a very deep place. We do what we do because we're driven by something. And connecting on that level is a huge directorial tool because the directing is manipulation. It's a good manipulation. If I know why you're doing what you're doing, I can bring you in. I can tap into that. I can connect it to this project that we're doing together that will cause us to not sleep, wake up at 4 a.m. and be in some field in minus 20 degrees. I don't know. It's just like crazy stuff. So let's start with getting to know each other. And then after that, talk about the movie in the deepest way. The characters. Do you see yourself in one of the characters? What is that? Really connect with this project on an emotional way. I promise you, all the directors who are listening, that you will get so much from the people you are working with. On set with their work, that they're harnessed to this more emotionally, but not only, you will get real human emotional ideas from the people you are working with because they see themselves in one or more of the characters. And then later after that, start looking at, each scene, honestly, and figuring out the arc, figuring out the moment that something needs to be emphasized. And now we're getting into visual strategy, which is a technique I talk about in the book. Way before shot listing, we need to talk about strategy. So what is a strategy? A strategy is, let's say, there's a moment in the scene that needs to be emphasized. Let's go textbook formula here. Somebody realizes something. So I want the audience to understand that something changed, and I want to emphasize that. So I'm actually not starting shot listing from the beginning of the scene. I'm starting from that moment, and then I ask, how would I like to emphasize that? What is the right way? Is it a lighting thing? Is it a close-up when the rest is a little bit wider? There's many ways to emphasize things. So we talk about that, and then let's say it's a close-up, right? Most of the scene is wide, and then suddenly there's a close-up. Editorially, that is an indication that something happens emotionally with the character. But that is not an indication if you had 20 close-ups before that moment. It's just another shot. So we approach the scene from a strategic way, and after that come the shots. So this is how I like to work. This is the way that I propose working in the book that really brings the cinematography into the story. And like I said earlier, the fascinating thing that happens is that it's not that the story changes, it becomes better. And I want to remind all the directors out there, you still get the credit of the director. The cinematographer still gets the credit of the cinematographer. It's all okay. It's okay to bring people in and pick the best idea. That's the job.
That's great insights. I mean, it's really all about a non-technical approach to technical subjects that you're kind of propagating, right?
Right.
You also say that a director can lead a lighting conversation because lighting isn't really about lamps at all. It's about observation and language. Can you unpack that for us?
Absolutely. Light is tricky. We can't see light. We can only see the source and the subject. What's in between is invisible. So, first of all, just generally, understanding how to talk about lighting is something that cinematographers need, lighting designers need, gaffers, lighting technicians, and directors, because lighting is all of that together. Remember the blocking rehearsal. A blocking rehearsal is lighting. We think of lighting as moving a lamp around a human. What about moving a human around a lamp? That's the same thing exactly. So the director is moving the humans, and the visual department is moving the lamps. Who is actually doing the lighting? Both of them. So in order to understand lighting, we need to, one, see it. And seeing it is not just, brightness, also it's understanding the four basic qualities of lighting: intensity, angle, color, and diffusion. And understanding how to see them. And then understanding how to communicate that, because they're very relative. When I tell you something is bright, is it bright compared to the sun? Is it bright compared to a candlelight? So there are ways to do that will allow us to have a conversation, a verbal conversation about a inherently visual subject, and use visual references. And all of that is a must for directors. But when I say that directors can participate in a lighting conversation, I bring in the blocking rehearsal. I bring in that line in the script that says interior day. That's lighting, right? As soon as you see that headline of a scene, you as a cinematographer start thinking, okay, well, the light's coming from a window. If there's a window, where is it coming from? But the decision to be inside during the day, that's not my decision to make as a cinematographer. That's written in the script. That's a collaboration between the director and the screenwriter. I can pitch things. I can try to sell, hey, it's going to be better at night, but it's not my decision. So when we create fictional worlds, when we put a scene in an old motel or a parking lot or driving in a country road or any of that stuff, we are already lighting. Screenwriters writing this thing, they see images, they're already lighting. So to have the language of lighting, to understand the objectives of lighting, all of that's a big part of the book, can create scenes before the cinematographer even joined the project. I promise the cinematographers who are listening to this, some of them are probably thinking, this is scary, but you're bringing people into my territory. Remember this territorial thing. I promise everybody it will make it easier, not more difficult, because it will make scenes more rich, more visually rich, when the screenwriter and the director can think lighting. And then comes the cinematographer, joins the project with visual references, fine-tunes it, and ultimately executes it.
Very cool. So basically same question for lenses. I mean, you say that directors don't really need to understand lenses deeply. However, they need to see the effects on screen and make decisions. But how do you teach someone lenses without getting lost in focal lengths and T-stops, really?
Yeah, well, this starts with a story. When I went to AFI, we had a great technical course, but I was always a little frustrated with the way lenses are taught, because I read, about, Janusz Kaminski removing lens coatings and all sorts of stuff that I can't do that. I don't understand this well enough. So when I was teaching at AFI, I took this MIT course about optics, this read books and created a lens seminar that you need to know really everyday stuff in the beginning. common sense. But then at the end, you can design lens tests and you can look at lens tests differently. And this course is on MZIP, actually, our lens course. And I'm very, very proud of that course. But again, throughout these 15 years that I've been teaching and also developing this highly technical course, I realized that to use lenses, you don't really need to have all of that technical knowledge. If you have an understanding of flares, what it looks like, see this in an image, and contrast, stuff that are pretty basic that you can't see, then comes the cinematographer later to connect the how. You don't need to understand the how in order to know that you can control these things. Some modern lenses flare very little and the contrast is very high. Some older lenses are not as sharp, contrast is low, and flare is crazy. We look at images, which one is better for the movie? This is absolutely a conversation that the director can participate in. Depth of field, focus, right? Looking at images, again, now, even before AI, I would take images, as a cinematographer, take images into Photoshop and make the background more out of focus and less out of focus and show it to my director and say, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 degrees to focus. What do you think works better? And the director says, I think this, because the director doesn't have the technical knowledge here, but they do have intention. And then we talk about why. And I guide the director through this journey because that's my job as a cinematographer. There's a lot of education in cinematography. I'm sure that readers, listeners will agree. So there's really a whole list of things. It's not T-stop, it's depth of field, right? These things are connected in our minds as cinematographer, but there's a whole list of characteristics and qualities of lenses that, honestly, based on my experience, once you see them in an image, you can't unsee them. It's almost like a curse you put in the directory. You say, here, now you join my world. You know, one of the best moments I had in my early career as a cinematographer was with my thesis director at AFI. I also shot our first feature. And we were on set. And, you know, as a cinematographer, you make compromises all the time. You just look at the monitor and it's like, if I had time, I would remove this, change that, but can't. And we're standing in front of the monitor, and she looks at the monitor, and she looks in the background. Something is shiny there. I saw that, and I already gave up on it. And she says, do you like this? And I was like, no, I really don't. And she said, can we do something about it? I said, absolutely. To me, it was a huge victory because I taught her, I helped her get to the place where she can see certain things, and then it goes back to me and I can fix things. Suddenly I have the permission and the time.
Yeah, I keep being surprised by directors that I also work with, and especially also students. I'm often surprised how little knowledge there is in how perspective works with different focal lengths from, you know, even directors who you would think should know better, but they really don't very often. And it's not their job. That's fine. You know, like I probably don't know a lot of storytelling techniques that they're using, for example. But especially like how long lenses can compress the background versus wide lenses, you know, like, you know, very often you get from some directors, you get I shoot documentaries, so you get instructed sometimes by people you don't know that well, that don't know, you know, how you work exactly. So they are like more like trying to play it safe, and they're like, oh, can you use a wide lens and go up really close? And then they're surprised that you see a lot more stuff than you're supposed to see. I was like, well, yeah, no, I should use a longer lens and go further back. And then it will compress it. Then they're really surprised that the image looks completely different, even though the character, you know, has the same size in the shot. I mean, it's like obvious stuff. But even with film students, I'm surprised that this is not common knowledge. And I can only agree with you. I think it's something that everybody should learn who's working in any visual, well, either photography or filmmaking. It's just how different focal lengths influence what's on screen, not just to kind of like, you know, shoot something that's far away with a long telephoto lens from where I am, but also to how the actual image is compressed and how perspective actually matters, because it tells a completely different story, and how intimacy is also conveyed through a wider lens that's close to a character versus a longer lens that's further away and just in the observational perspective, right? I mean, all of that's also a language of cinematography, because I think there's also a famous Roger Deakins interview actually where he's talking about that, where
he tells the cameraman to change the lens.
Exactly, where he's actually being shot in an interview, and he's telling the cameraman behind the camera, they're like, "Why are you on a long lens far away from me? Just come up close and use a wider lens, and you will have more intimacy, because we are used to seeing, probably something, I would say something like a 25 millimeter without the peripheral vision. So if somebody's sitting right next to us, and you can just imagine having a 25 mil next to somebody, and it will give you that feeling of being next to somebody versus just using a 50 or 85 mil further away. And he's so right about that. Yeah, it creates a completely different atmosphere, and I think we see it on full display, especially in movies and series that work with basically long sequences, like a long uninterrupted shot, because those series and movies tend to use a wider lens because they just need to be flexible. I mean, just as a more recent example, the Netflix series Adolescence, I think it was shot was something like 28 mil or 25 mil, and you have to do that because you need to be flexible enough to get a wide shot and a close-up in the same shot. But at the same time, you have that advantage that you're actually more intimate with people, because you will have to move close up to them in order to get a close-up if you are on 25 millimeter lens. So yeah, I think that's just another example of how understanding focal lengths will actually really help tell you the story in a much better way if you're a director as well.
There is an exercise, like the reading exercise, one that I do for lenses. I show an image from the Hurt Locker, and then I also show a shot from the Tree of Life. And I ask the students a very silly question. I ask them to think of the distance of the camera from the subject. Guess, in meters, in feet, wherever you are. And in the Hurt Locker shot, it's a long lens far away. And, you get responses, 100 meters, 50 feet, and so on. And then you go to the Tree of Life, people say, okay, this is 1 foot, 2 foot. And I say, forget about lenses for a moment. Think of the fact that you can take your audience, pick them up, and put them far away from a character or very, very close to them. Isn't that a great storytelling tool? That's it. We already made progress in less than a minute because it's a directorial tool. A director who doesn't understand lenses is leaving on the table a huge storytelling tool. And it doesn't require much understanding of, technique behind focal length or stops or any of that. So yeah, absolutely.
Let's actually stick with Roger Deakins for a second and kind of segue into the AI conversation, which we need to have in this day and age. And he recently actually said that AI isn't cheating if you have a reason for making a film with it, a decent story and something to say. And that is, of course, it's kind of deemed provocative because there's a huge pushback in the creative community, also among our audience, against anything to do, or not anything, but a lot of things to do with especially generative AI, which is understandable because a lot of people feel threatened by these by this new technology. And unusually, in this case also, cinematographers pushed back really hard against Roger Deakins because we had other people like other famous directors and cinematographers being very outspoken against generative AI. So what did that reaction reveal to you about how differently people understand what cinematography actually is?
That's a great question. And, you're right. This is a conversation we must have. The interesting thing is that even when Deakins said AI is not cheating, he already acknowledges that this is a controversial topic. But why mention the word cheating? And really at the base of the conversation is a difference in how he sees AI and maybe even cinematography compared to how many other people see it. when he talks about AI, the way I understand it is that he sees it as a tool. It's a new camera. It's a new technological invention that will allow me to tell stories in a new way, maybe easier, whatnot. And if it was that, then AI would be cheating to cinematography like photography is cheating for painters. But there's another side of this. And the side is actually related to our creative intent. When we create movies, we bring in an army of people. A production designer, a makeup artist, a cinematographer, a gaffer, grip. All these people who are making decisions. At the heart of a creative process are decisions. An author writing a book agonizes over every comma and every word in the vocabulary, much like we as cinematographers agonize over the lighting or the eye light and so on and so on. We bring a level of control to our work that is very, very high, and every artist on set does that. Right? Everybody looks at the same image and sees a million things. When we create images with AI at the moment, and obviously this is a moving target, but at the moment, we cannot bring that level of control to using AI. So what happens is that people look at images created by AI, which are great. They look amazing. But what we can't see is how much people gave up on their original intention when creating that image. And I want to be very, very clear about this. When you give up your intention because you're unable to create something from a skill perspective, that's not a technological problem. That's just giving up. That's giving up to mediocrity, right? So Roger Deakins sees AI as a tool. The problem is when we use that tool and we start changing our intention. This is not new. It happened before. One example that I give in the article is the appearance of the 5D. In the beginning, when the Canon 5D appeared, also the moire and dynamic range, but everybody was so enthusiastic about having a small camera that gives you the shallow depth of field that they forgave the quality problem. And then, of course, it jumped back. So what we need to do, we need to decide where we are on the scale of intention. If we are insisting on maintaining the high level of intention and not submitting to good enough, which is always a problem in filmmaking that always suffers from lack of resources and budgets and all that stuff, then we will find ways to use AI that doesn't jeopardize our intention, and then we're in Deakins territory. And we're fine. But as soon as we start jeopardizing our creative decision-making, and that's what people are really worried about, in addition to all the fact that it's trained on other images and so on and so on, that's a whole different question. But as soon as we jeopardize our creative intention, then we start cutting off the branch that we are actually sitting on.
You actually created an AI image, which we have on screen here, that is inspired by Morisot's painting, The Reading, using Midjourney, which is a famous, of course, generative image model, which now also has some video. You say your first attempts failed because you were asking for two characters side by side and you gave the AI too much freedom, which is exactly what you just alluded to. So what did you have to specify to get an image that actually worked?
Right. So what I'm trying to do is replicate the level of control that we're used to. This is not anything new when we make movies. I'm looking at The Reading, Morisot's Reading, and I'm thinking how great the effect is that you can decide who the main character is and how 99% of the people looking at it agree on who the main character is. And then I go to Midjourney and I write, create the scene. There's two women, daughter and mother sitting on a couch, and so on and so on. And of course, the thing that comes out has nothing, doesn't look like anything like The Reading or elicits that effect that I'm looking for. So I'm starting to be more specific. And what am I specific about? I want a certain amount of framing. She needs to be at the center. I want the mother to look down at the book and our main character to look up so that we have more access to the face. I want to create the contrast between their clothing and their background. And I want the lighting to be a certain way and so on and so on. These are all the ways, like we have intention, beginning, and we have the ways to achieve that intention. But before you know it, I am a cinematographer. I am writing to Midjourney the effect that I want and how to achieve it. And I'm in cinematography territory because what cinematographers do every day on set is understand the intention, have a conversation with the director, and then communicate that intention to other people. So as a cinematographer, I'm still pretty confident, again, given the fact that we don't give up our intention, that we insist on it, I'm pretty confident that I'm still needed because somebody needs to be able to communicate that. It doesn't help. Try. Go to Midjourney and tell it to make one of the characters the main character. What you'll get is very aggressive techniques that we would never imagine to do. Like, of course, if you put a spotlight on somebody, people will think they're the main character, but that's maybe not the style that we're going for. So in order to create the kind of subtle techniques that were in the original painting, you have to know visual storytelling.
I think the irony of this, of where we currently are with this technology, is that it's not dissimilar to actually interpreting a script, right? It's kind of interpreting what you write into images, and but all these models, they don't actually see anything. What they do, even the visual models, is they decipher text, or even if you feed in an image, let's say you feed in an actual image, it analyzes the image, it sees, oh, there's two characters, there's something in the background, there's different colors, it might identify the kind of texture and how it is painted, if it's a painting or something like that. And then it translates this for itself into text, and based on that text, it will create something new, right? So that is actually, it's kind of a weird way of, because it doesn't actually have a visual quality whatsoever. And that's, as far as I understand, that's the fundamental problem with it right now. That most of those, that basically anything you do with any kind of AI, it's always going back to the text, even if you don't see the text, right? So, but on the other hand, it's also not dissimilar to interpreting a script as a director, as a DP, where you actually, but as a human, of course, we have a visual understanding. We have this quality of, we immediately get images in our head. It's not that, like we read a text and our brain generates more text to interpret that, what we just read. It literally, for us, generates images in our mind that we then try to actually realize with our camera. And I think that is right now the fundamental difference here. But of course, we know that those technologies are evolving extremely fast. I mean, I think probably since you've written the book, there's been 5 new models that have come out that have already, gotten a little bit closer to character consistency and actually being much closer to what people are prompting, writing than before. So of course, none of us is a prophet, but where do you think we are in, 2 years from now? Because right now we still have, let's just bring up this Coca-Cola commercial, the Christmas ad. I don't know if you heard about that recently they published, and it was entirely AI created a huge pushback, and they decided to pull it after all that pushback after some time. But we also heard that they needed hundreds and hundreds of thousands of prompts in order to have a finished product in the end. Where will we be with this in 1 or 2 years from now? And commercials, I think, or we think in general at CineD, that commercials and stock images, stock footage will be probably the most highly affected, niches of our industry from that, because we know that high budget commercials, they cost a lot of money to make. It's very much a prestige thing, and it's all about looks in many cases. It's all about storytelling. Of course, story is important, but as soon as, and I already see people, who are good storytellers being able to tell also nice, consistent stories with AI already. I can't see really a big future in advertising, like in commercials, to be honest, in the future, because you don't need to display actual humans. Everybody knows it's fake. And, why would you even do this with real people if it costs a lot of money? That's kind of the provocative statement here, but I think this is where things are headed. What do you think?
Well, first of all, let me distill the problem in a non-technical way. AI is not basing its decisions, if you can call them that, on intention, but on convention. And again, this is not new for filmmaking. And I'll take an example, coverage. Coverage is a convention. And many of the listeners and viewers know that, there's this idea that if you shoot a dialogue scene, no problem. 2 over the shoulders and a wide shot, done. Moving on. Now, let me ask you this. If it's that easy, and let's say that in a normal movie, what's the percentage of a movie that's a dialogue scene? But half? Who needs you for that half? Bring in the cheaper dialogue scene expert, if not let AI do it, and call it a day. But that's not the case. Watch the many, many great movies out there, and you'll see that the mid-dialogue scene, all sorts of things happen. You suddenly go to a different place, it doesn't match, there's movement, all sorts of decisions that are not conventional. And they are all driven by intention. When we create these things with AI, it's driven by convention and not intention. And that looks fine, right? It looks fine on screen, much like a dialogue scene looks fine. But it gives up something that's at the core of what it is that we do. And we, as the people who create these things, need to decide if that's where we want things to go to or not. Now, when you ask me about the future, this makes me think about how technology companies understand what it is that we do, because our future right now is in the hands of technology companies. And I'm saying this right after, just a few days after a big technology company acquired a huge studio. So definitely, if we haven't noticed that we're shifting there, that's what we are. I'll use a metaphor from a different field here. Searching. If you give a technologist, a technology company, the challenge of search, like you're looking for something on the internet, the way that they see it is that the faster they can provide you with the result, what it is exactly that you're looking for, the better the product. However, for creatives, for filmmakers, when you search for something, the journey matters. You become inspired. You're actually not just searching, you're discovering. So when you tell me about the Coca-Cola ad that they needed to create this again and again and again and again until they got what they wanted, or change things again and again and again, and everybody who's using AI knows that it takes many, many iterations, that's simply a byproduct of you insisting on what you want, which is a good thing, right? You know what you want, so you're not giving up. You're doing again and again, you're telling in that, and then it breaks over there, and then you change it, and again and again and again. And ultimately, you get to the point where you're saying, close enough. And you got to ask yourself, if you were on set, would you settle for that or not? And that's for you to answer. It's not the technology's fault. It's for you to answer. So we are right now at a point maybe where it's unfeasible to create this thousands of times because of price, because of all sorts of things, right? We can't get there. So more people are settling earlier. So let's just say that AI, you're asking about the future, AI will get better at understanding your intention, right? And executing it faster. What that means is that you still need to have intention, right? So I still need to have that part. And the fact that technology companies will strive to get your intention faster will remove the element of discovery. Because when we do this with AI and it creates something new and something new and something new, magic, our intention changes. The same way that when we look at visual references and when we collaborate, the scene changes, our ideas change. It's a good thing. That's how ideation comes. That's how we create movies and all sorts of visual or non-visual creative ideas. So let's say that AI got to the place where it knows what I want so quickly, we now remove a whole part of our job that is essential to it. Maybe my original idea was not that great. Maybe I needed that little bit of discovery like I always do, like many people do. And that's, on one hand, you can look at it as a positive thing. Well, you get what you want faster, great. But on the other hand, it's also very, very dangerous. Our workflow is going to change. Intention is still going to be needed. Somebody, like a director, is still going to articulate, I want people to know who the main character is, let's say Morissette painting. But am I outsourcing the how to the point where, is it the lighting? Is it the framing? Is AI doing that? Because if so, then AI becomes the cinematographer. And maybe I look at the result and I'm thinking, this is good. I didn't think about it, but that's a great idea. But now I need to have enough knowledge to make it consistent throughout the movie, because that's a big part of cinematography. Cinematographers know that you come up with an idea, but the rest of your time is like plumbing. It's maintenance. You have to maintain the contrast ratio. You have to maintain the black level. You have to maintain the kind of lighting or the way, the lens that you use for the main character. Can the director have enough knowledge to recognize that? Can the AI have enough technical knowledge to know that that's what we want in the film industry? Unknown. Everything unknown. But I do know, you're asking me about 1 and 2 years. If I had to guess, I don't think that we will be there in 1 and 2 years. Because what's going to happen is the same thing that happened with many other technologies. The quality is going to go down of the product, the movies, the things that we experience. And then it will go back up when people realize that it's not enough. And we've had that happen cyclically again and again with different types of technology. And I think it's already happening, like you said about commercials or whatnot. It will come back to audiences and creators having to decide where the line is. Will it happen in the next 1 or 2 years? I don't know.
I think right now everybody is just puzzled and astounded by what's visible, like visually possible. But you're nailing, you're really hitting the nail on the head by saying that it's the intention that matters. And if you really look at what people set out to do with any kind of AI and what they get in the end, those are very different things very often still, right? And I think the technology companies have realized that they need to narrow that gap in order to be really useful, because very often people start with one thing and then they get a result that's something different, and then it's a good enough kind of thing, and then they're like, okay, I'm going to use that, but originally I wanted something else. And that's not only true for images, it's also true for anything right now, with the aid of AI, where I think right now the sweet spot is, and that's what we are also trying to focus on with those latest AI workflow courses. We call them workflow courses. It's basically augmenting your creative vision. So you have an intention, you need something, and you also are a creative, so you are taking photos, you're making videos, and then you're using that and you're putting, some AI tools on top of that to kind of augment your vision, but you're not kind of making stuff from scratch, kind of just using AI. You're using your creativity, and then you're applying those tools in order to be more productive. For example, it can be something like, we have a course about masking, for example, which is basically showing you in all the NLE tools how to do video masking, which has become incredibly easy. There's no need for rotoscoping anymore in many cases, because you have tools to do that for you if you know how to use them. Same is true with subtitles, captioning, transcription, and also, 3D models of spaces, kind of like location scouting, really, you can do a 3D model of any space and just know exactly the distances between each object and subject without, looking at location photos and forgetting how big something was or how far it was apart from something else, which is always a problem when you are actually location scouting. With a 3D model, you can know that. And we're just trying to teach people that actually you should use those tools, you don't need to be fundamentally against those, because they are also machine learning based things, but all of those things are probably things that are better done by a machine because they would save you a lot of time. Will some rotoscope artists lose their jobs? Yes, but you have to ask yourself the question, is that a job that you wanted to do in the first place? Honestly, that's like almost, it's like assembly line work. And those are the things, I think, as long as you don't give up your creativity, but you use those tools to augment it and actually free up the one thing that none of us has ever enough of, no matter if you're rich or poor, which is time, then I think you're using it in the right way. And that's what you can do right now without being fundamentally against the technology. And when it comes to generative AI, same thing, apply it to the creative work that you're doing on your intention, on the intent of storytelling, then it can be useful.
Yeah. We have to acknowledge also the fact that a big part of this conversation, industry-wise, is the fact that parallel and before AI, the creator industry started and is flourishing. I think the statistics show that the most popular editing program used is CapCut. We are really at a time where filmmaking is blending into many, many other fields. I think that I read that Netflix is getting into the podcast territory too, which podcast used to be only listening, and now we are on video. So this is an interesting format also. So there's a lot of changes happening, and many of these, let's say, media types or whatever we call these different, if it's content, are led by people who don't necessarily see themselves as filmmakers. This comes later, but they are, of course, using cameras, and they do care about quality and all sorts of things that we have in common. So I think this is all going to mix more and more as we move forward. And the tools that we're so used to, that are very specialized, that we have, are going to become rare and rare because people who don't have the technical expertise are going to start using them. And we need to do, especially cinematographers, at AFI, we said the cinematographer is the guardian of the image. This is going to become more and more important because less people are going to see the things that we see. What does it mean, artifacts? What does it mean, aberrations? What does it mean when something is slightly out of focus? Does it matter? Does it matter at all? That's the conversation. We can't anymore take this for granted that it matters, things that we grew up on and we just assume. We have to be able to show people that it matters. And if we can't show people that it matters, and I'm saying this as an educator for 15 years, I did that technical course and so on. If I can't show people that are non-technical that it matters, then I'm starting to ask myself, does it matter? Big question.
That's a great quote. We're going to use that. Yeah, so you also compare AI to the Canon 5D era. And that's, like you said, limited dynamic range, moire, and everyone tolerated it because of the tool that was exciting. And we know exactly, that's when our website was born. We used to be called Cinema 5D as a forum for the filmmakers who were taking this Canon 5D seriously as a filmmaking tool when everybody else established in the industry was kind of like, raising their eyebrows or rolling their eyes even when we showed up on set with a camera like that. So you said, what happens when the excitement fades here?
Well, it all comes back to quality. When everybody has a 5D, then you need an advantage, right? And the advantage goes back to what we were used to before. Now it needs to be better. It's not enough to do more, which is what the Canon 5D allowed us to do more, faster, cheaper. So now they sold all the cameras. Everybody has this. Everybody has AI. Everybody has Veo and Nano Banana and all that stuff. And it costs cents on our end, the consumer end. So everybody can do it. And we are, I think, still at the place where everybody is in wow. So it's integrating and integrating and integrating. At some point, the water is going to level. And then you'll need quality again. So that's what happened with the 5D. Suddenly people did notice the moire. People did notice that you can't color correct that compressed file. People noticed that handheld with a camera that weighs like a feather looks like this and not the handheld that we know, and so on and so on and so on. So we started doing weird things, right? We started having all sorts of adapters. Remember the adapter for 35 millimeter lenses on consumer cameras we had in the 90s? We always tried to jerry rig all sorts of things. So with the 5D, external recorders, all sorts of things that suddenly, literally attaching bricks to these things that'll be heavier on our shoulders. And before you know it, you're back where you were. Cheaper, more accessible, for sure. There's an advantage. But you kind of settled at a place that's more familiar. And I think to some degree, this will also happen with AI, to some degree, but we also have to accept, like you said earlier about rotoscoping and other things, that change is inevitable. It will also change things, like the Canon 5D changed things. We will experience more change up ahead.
I think it's an interesting point what you just mentioned about image quality, that, like something that we were amazed about when it came out, like the 5D. Very quickly we started seeing its faults as technology progressed, and we kind of demanded more from the camera manufacturers. And suddenly, when you look back and look at that footage now, it still has some dreamy quality because it's not really sharp, 5D footage. And some of it still looks good, but you have all these image faults like moire and aliasing and all that. And, very limited dynamic range, as you said. And I recently was a judge on a student film competition here in Austria. And somebody submitted an AI-generated film, but it wasn't like, it was very artistic. So it was like in a category where experimental film or whatever. And I think this was created probably a year ago or so. At that time, I think everybody probably thought it looks great. I at least, and I think the rest of the judges too, we looked at it on the big screen at the award ceremony, and it looked terrible. I mean, it's like horrible. It looked like the early stages of AI. And when we talk about the early stages of AI, it's literally just 1 or 2 or 3 years ago, but it feels like a million years ago. You cannot actually watch that anymore. And like you said, I think a lot of the AI images generated today will not age well, because you will look at them, and because the technology is progressing so quickly, it's just simply not going to be accepted anymore very soon, like what's generated now. And I feel like, I hope it's not just us visual people, but the general public will be exposed to, fortunately / unfortunately, so much of that stuff that everybody will create a kind of sense of when something is fake, and then will demand more. But on the other hand, I think when we talk about the 5D era versus where we are now, I gave a talk in your neighborhood, actually, at Build Expo in June in New York. And I was literally comparing those two eras as well, but in a different kind of way. Is I compared it more to that resistance that you got from the establishment. And when I say establishment, is established filmmakers. And I mentioned it before, back in the day, there was a big resistance against people showing up with what they called a photo camera on a film set with a DSLR, by anybody, like who was at that time already, earning their proper living with a camera. They would, even if it was a video camera with a small sensor, they didn't take this seriously. Many of them didn't. And the ones who did, I think, were the ones who were able to, tell stories in a more affordable way. That's essentially what happened with the 5D and everything that came after. And it also brought down the price of all the equipment that came, also the higher end cameras. And like what you said right now, it's basically, it's not just filmmakers, people call themselves creators, but they are essentially kind of benefiting from all the technological change that has happened over the last 15 years when it comes to camera technology and being more accessible and, having this filmic look really for no money anymore. But those people who didn't accept that this is happening, they're out of business now. And my fear is that people who are completely dismissing this AI technology, whether you like it or not, I think you need to familiarize yourself with how it's working and how it's progressing. You don't need to use it, but you probably should play with it, especially when you're a storyteller, because it hasn't ever been more affordable to tell a story than it is now, whether it comes down to affordable cameras or generative AI. And even though the results might not be great yet, and it's very difficult to handle, I think the people who put themselves in the right spot right now for this, who come from a filmmaking background, will have a huge advantage in the future, because they will know storytelling versus, the people who are just literally prompting individual shots don't. And it will, I think, eventually will all come down to the fact that technology kind of fades away. It's kind of like not important anymore. It already doesn't matter anymore which camera you use, because all the cameras are great that are in the market right now, right? That's what we see in the high end. That's why the high end is suffering so much, because nobody's buying a new Alexa anymore. There's so many already in the market. that's one thing. And on the other hand, like for the kind of like mid-range productions or like upper mid-range productions, you don't actually see the difference anymore, whether you use a high budget camera or something that probably costs $5,000 or $6,000 or even $3,000. So that's fading away. And now AI on top of that, I think at some point we will come to a point where it's the differentiation between a successful and an unsuccessful filmmaker will simply be their ability to tell stories, both visually and in a written way. And if you combine those two, like combining directors and cinematographers' skills, I think you will be on a winning streak. But it will not matter anymore at some point whether you use an expensive or an inexpensive camera or a camera at all, in many cases, unfortunately. You will just need to tell a story and then you will be able to get a great result.
You remind me, I shot this movie in Vietnam that was a lot of night exterior. And we were already color correcting while we were shooting. And of course, this required a lot of equipment. It was very expensive. And one day the producer came to the color correction room and looked at the image and he said, Tal, a couple of months ago, we had a cinematographer come in and he used this small camera and he didn't need lighting at all. So why do you need all of that? So I told him, you know what? Bring up that shot. Let's put them side by side. Now, inside, I was terrified because what happens if I'm wrong? But this was around the time the 5D came out and all that stuff. I said, put the shot side by side. And the colorist put them side by side. And you could see noise, you could see the contrast, you could see how the light sources blew out immediately, all sorts of things. I didn't really need to say much. But in order to be in that position, I needed to know the 5D. I needed to know, quote unquote, the enemy. In order to confidently say that, yeah, inside I was still hesitant, but I still did it. So if you are out there and you have this strong feeling against AI, forget AI for a moment, know your customer. And know that you need to work with non-technical people and you need to be able to back up what you're saying with images. I always say that a big part of being a cinematographer is being an educator. We always teach our collaborators. And as an educator for 15 years, I also know that the teacher also has to be a student. The day I will stop learning is also the day I will stop being a teacher. So if you do basic math, it means that being a cinematographer also means always being a student. You have to always learn, whether it is for you to adopt that technology or for you to back up what you say with actual evidence. It's not enough that you just say it. It needs to be true. It needs to be visible. And as long as you're able to do that, you are going to be fine until, of course, the day that you will discover that you're not right. And then you need to be the responsible professional and change and move forward and adapt and learn. That is the path. There is unfortunately no way around it. Nino, like you said, resisting without knowing will eventually leave you behind. And this happened so many times in history before that it's not really an argument anymore. And again, it's not about AI. It's about the people who hire us. It's the people who we owe an actual explanation to, the people who will pay for the lamps and the cameras and all of that, that we need to show, it's their money, they deserve us to show them why we need this and why this is the right way to do that. And as long as we're able to do that, we'll stick around.
Your advice to filmmakers is to embrace technology, like you just said, rather than escape it, but use it in a way that preserves that creative intention. Now, let's just one last time practically break that down. What does that mean for somebody working today?
When we study film, we go through all of the steps. You take the script, you break it down. You find the moments that you want to emphasize. You develop a visual strategy. All these things are described in the book. And then ultimately, you create images, but that's not the end. You show them to an audience and you ask for feedback and you compare the feedback with your intention. That is the cycle. Did the audience understand what you wanted to communicate? Did they realize the character understood something, changed their mind, decided to act, whatever it is, the moment that you wanted that to happen? We are in a communicative medium. It's not all about expression. If they did, great. Remember what you did right so you can do it again next time. If not, great. See what you did wrong, do it again better next time, and so on and so on and so on. So at the end of the day, we have to maintain that formula. The fact that there is a technology that makes things better or faster or allows us to do things we didn't do before, doesn't change the fact that we have an intention and it's our responsibility to make sure that it landed. All the pictures and videos that you see on the internet, they're great, but you can't see what the original intention was. And in many cases, the intention was different. But this right now here is a conversation with filmmaking professionals. You know what you want to achieve. So you have to be the supervisor for yourself and look at the final image that you created and ask yourself, does it achieve the thing that I wanted? If the answer is no and you're proceeding anyway, that's completely fine. Everybody has the right to do that. But know that you are now contributing to your own demise. That's just the reality. You have to insist on the quality, on the expression of your intention the same way that we did always on a movie set. And if AI is the tool to use it, then great, do it exactly like Deakins said. And if AI is not the tool, then that's fine. Like the 5D was good for certain things, and the red was good for certain things, and the Alexa, and sometimes we want anamorphic lenses, and sometimes we want spherical, and a 10K or a 1K. All these are different tools. Pick the right one that gets you what you want. Never give up what you want to achieve.
Very nice. So let's close this slowly and just tell me, what's one thing that you hope a director will take away from your book, and also one thing that you hope a cinematographer will take away from it?
I hope a director will have a new set of vocabulary, another language. Language is not only for expression, it's also for thinking, which means that the director will be able to expand the way that they see scenes in their mind, use lighting or lenses or any of the tools that we have in order to think about scenes in a certain way and really tell stories better, the way that they can, only they with their own story. So that I would love for directors to do, and that's the purpose of the book. Oh, by the way, not only directors, also creative producers and even screenwriters. For cinematographers, I think there's a lot in the book that overlaps with directing naturally. So I think that cinematographers will discover a lot about script breakdown, about areas of the meeting between cinematography and directing that maybe they didn't consider before. And if they read it, it will allow them to speak with their director in a new way, to consider their perspective, to resolve if there is any conflict better, and to really articulate things that are technically complex in a non-technical way so that they can communicate intention and get what they want better. So that's kind of the collaboration between the cinematographer and director is really the purpose of this book.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tal, for this conversation. Your book, Cinematography Beyond Technique, is out now. Just tell our audience where they can actually get it.
Well, I think that by now, it's available anywhere. So you can get it on Amazon, you can get it on the Focal Press store, routledge.com. You can get it in Barnes & Noble. And if you just Google Cinematography Beyond Technique, I'm sure that a bunch of stuff will come up. And in the website, by the way, The Language of Cinematography, you can reach out to me and tell me if I'm right. Tell me if the collaboration was more successful, what the director's response is. There'll be more editions. And like the book is the result of 15 years listening to students, I would like future editions to be the result of listening to readers.
Awesome. So do you have time now again to make a new MZIT course for us?
Absolutely. I think that with the advancement of AI, we need to go back to the drawing board.
All right. Thank you so much, Tal. This was a really great conversation.
Thanks, Nino.
And thanks everybody for listening and watching. And of course, don't forget to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or on YouTube. Leave a comment. Email us at podcast@cined.com for any questions or comments, and we'll try to address them in the next or one of the next episodes. And see you next week.